absolutely delighted to be here today. Thank you so much. If you are in a position where you feel like putting your camera on, that would be very, very welcome. It's always much more pleasurable to deliver to faces. So if you would like to, no pressure at all, but thank you so much. Thank you to those that have. Lovely. That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm assuming that you're all in Canada. Beautiful country. I've spent some lovely time in Canada. Really very, very much enjoyed it. So yes, lovely to see you. It's 8:30 in the evening for me. I'm not actually in the UK. I'm on the island of Madeira currently, which is part of Portugal. Very beautiful, but it's the same time as the UK. So today I am going to be throwing quite a lot of research at you because that's kind of what I've done and what I've got a fair bit of. But you will be able to have an access to the recording for this, and do take photos as well if anything strikes you or that you want to kind of make a note of, because I will kind of go through, I won't speed through, but there's a lot to get through because I would like to leave some time at the end for questions and for perhaps giving you some practical exercises and ideas to go away with. So I will share my screen and get on with the slides. So there we go. Can you all see that? Oops. Great, thank you. So as Dawn said, my plan for this session is to start with an overview of singing for health generally in terms of the research, and then we're going to focus in specifically on respiratory health. We're starting actually even before that, thinking about the voice and singing and where this has come from. We were singing before we were talking. So the evidence and the research that we have tells us that before we had words and language, we were using melody, prosody, and rhythm in our voices to communicate, to survive, to thrive, before we had words. Melody and rhythm were essential for survival and communication. And so it's suggested that the loud calls of early humanoids may have been the substrate from which human singing and ultimately music evolved. The earliest notated song was a Hurrian cult song dating back to the middle of the second millennium. And then I really like this quote from Panksepp. And he said, "Music is uniquely efficacious in resonating with our basic emotional systems, bringing to life many affective proclivities that may be encoded as birthrights within ancient neural circuits constructed by our genes. Essentially, we are hardwired for music. We are hardwired for singing." A good place to start, I think. For a brief history, so singing for health is not a new thing, and we're going to go into some of the more recent research that we consider to be more robust because it's peer-reviewed. But actually, if we look back beyond the last 20, before the last 20 years, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence which links singing and health, and this more sort of scientific, peer-reviewed, more robust research has emerged really only in the last 2 decades. Sorry, I'm not caught up with myself there. The English composer William Byrd claimed that singing is good for health. It strengthens the muscles of the chest, improves breathing, and helps with voice problems, including stammering. 1588. And another lovely quote, I think, here from Elsden in 1897, "There is no more perfect system of light gymnastics in existence than the practice of singing properly conducted. Nasal breathing, a great adjunct to health, is acquired. The diaphragm and other important muscles which too often lie dormant are brought into action. The throat is strengthened and every part of the torso is benefited." Well, that sounds much more enjoyable than going to the gym for a workout to me. And we know that the release of endorphins, which reduce pain, also the head, neck and trunk exercise increases airflow and oxygenation of the blood, improved breathing techniques are all promoted by singing. And this is a really interesting little factoid for you as well, that in the 1930s, it was noticed that singers were living to the age of between 80 and 100, which at that time was a really, very, very decent age to live to, which somewhere along the line, somebody thought, hang on a minute, singers are living longer, there's something in this. There's something in this. So that was noticed. So in terms of what we consider and deem to be more scientific, empirical, peer-reviewed research, this has really emerged in the last couple of decades. So certainly in the UK, Dr. Stephen Clift and his team at Canterbury Christ Church University carried out the first piece of published research which consolidated the benefits of singing as improved breathing, improved speech and posture, improved circulation, reduced pain levels, and increased sense of well-being. That was a survey of 84 adult choral singers. So just a little caveat to add to any of this research around singing for health is that predominantly the research has been carried out with groups of adults who have self-selected, so they are singing because they want to. So we just have to kind of remember that when we're looking at this research. Anyhow, what this showed was that most significant findings were reports in improved well-being, relaxation, breathing function, and posture, those being the kind of the main key findings from this research. Other results were touching on the spiritual impact, emotional and immune function, particularly people were noticing changes in their heart rate. A similar study more recently was carried out, so 2018, and this was a larger study which was international, so not just in the UK, and this had 1,779 adult participants, again, all choir members. And the themes that came out from this study echoed very much those findings from Stephen Clift's initial study in 2001, finding the social connection, physical and physiological benefits, specifically respiratory health, cognitive stimulation, mental health benefits, enjoyment, and even this sense of singing ending up being something that transcends. We have this experience of transcendence when we're singing together with others. So there's the study there. That was Hilary Moss, who's based at the University of Limerick in Ireland. And then since then, research has continued to confirm benefits in singing for mental health and well-being. And if you are interested in delving a little bit more into the research, do look at the work of Daisy Fancourt. She's based at UCL and has carried out, she's churned out lots and lots and lots of studies around singing and health, physical health, respiratory, posture and alignment, voice function, pain management. So there are studies into all of these areas now. Pain management is one of my specialist interests as well, having found through my initial research the mention of endorphins so many times. Singing releases endorphins. Endorphins are our natural painkiller. Why aren't we using singing to help with pain? So I'm exploring that now with the National Health Service where I live, where they're funding a pilot research project. And then I know this does sit within mental health and wellbeing, but I've put it separately because there's so much about how group singing really does support social connections and this sense of community. And research even has shown that people singing together in a group, their heartbeats start to synchronize, breath and heart rate starts to synchronize. We become entrainment. So it's like there's the experiment where lots of pendulum clocks were put in a room and set off at all different times. And then after a period of time, they all became entrained and they all were moving together, because nature likes the path of least resistance. So it's easier to work with something than it is against it. So that's entrainment, this kind of really, really connecting. And if you want to read a bit more about that, Dave Camlin has published a nice piece of research fairly recently around how singing could be used to promote and support a sense of a healthy public. So I'm sorry, I didn't have time, I didn't look for data for Canada, but I'm sure it probably mirrors. So this is data from our National Health Service, living with long-term conditions, so chronic health conditions which are not curable. There's nothing that can be done, it's just that people need to be supported with managing these long-term conditions. And in the UK, and at this time of this research, found that people with these long-term conditions were taking up 50% of GP appointments, 64% of hospital outpatient appointments, taking up 70% of hospital bed days and 70% of healthcare spend. So a phenomenal amount of our healthcare budget seems to be directed towards supporting people with long-term conditions for which there is no medical cure. So this is why our national health system has been really pushing forward with the idea of social prescribing. And I know there are some examples in Canada of where social prescribing is kind of being used and growing, but it's been a real commitment from our NHS to fund social prescribing. So mainly the funding has gone towards people who are called link workers or social prescribers, and they're like a triage system. So they see patients and they listen, and they're able to spend much more time than a doctor can. They're able to dedicate a lot more time looking more holistically at the patient, and then finding out, instead of what's the matter with you, they're finding out what matters to you, and then supporting them to do more of what matters to them. So signposting and linking to community projects that person might be interested in. So singing could be one of those activities. So I just thought I'd add that in because I'm sure it's probably a very similar situation everywhere, really. So yes, so there at the bottom, long-term conditions are typically things like diabetes, chronic pain, so living with arthritis, fibromyalgia, and COPD is a big one, or any other respiratory condition that it can't be cured, it just needs to be managed. So those are examples. So how are we doing? Good. So we're going to move now into the part about breath and breathing and singing for lung health. And I've just read a really fantastic book that I'm going to show you in a moment, but I took this quote from there, from an ancient Chinese saying, what the bodily form relies on is breath, or qi, also energy, breath and energy. And what breath relies on is form. When the breath is perfect, the form is perfect too. So breath is essential for our physical health. So I liked that. So forgive me if any of you are healthcare professionals and probably know this more than I do, but just a quick look through the respiratory system. We know breathing is essential for our survival. Without breath, we cannot survive longer than a few minutes unless you've trained yourself to be a free diver, and you can, but that takes an awful lot of training to be able to do that. It is possible, but for most of us, we need to breathe regularly. So breathing is the body's automatic response to a need for oxygen. It provides a function of ventilation and gas exchange. So oxygen is taken into the breath, into the lungs. Well, it travels down this intricate pathway of these tubes into the ends, into either lung, and at the ends there are these alveoli, of which we have about 600 million of these little alveoli, which if you put them all out and spread them all out, they would be about the size of half a tennis court. And this is where, so we've got a lot of surface area for this gas exchange to take place, where the molecules hop off and they go and travel around the body and deliver energy. So that's what it's all about. And the remarkable thing about breathing is that it's an automatic function. We don't need to consciously do it, but we can consciously take control of it. So in terms of lung conditions, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but there are two sort of main types: obstructive, restrictive. And so in my experience, mostly with the Singing for Lung Health work that I do and that my colleagues do, we're working mainly with obstructive conditions, so COPD, bronchiectasis, asthma, and sometimes cystic fibrosis. But with cystic fibrosis, if somebody's got cystic fibrosis, they can't mix with somebody else with the same. I've only had one person, luckily, in the group, but they can't mix with somebody else with cystic fibrosis. So it can be a very isolating disease and very, very horrible one, cystic fibrosis. But the obstructive bit is that there's obstructions in the airways. There's scarring or swelling, mostly scarring that kind of obstructs the airflow. And what this leads to is a sense of not being able to get enough breath in. Can't get breath in, but really it's about not being able to get the breath out. So that's the issue for people with obstructive respiratory conditions. It's that actually it's not about not getting breath in, which is what they feel like. It's really about getting the breath out. We're going to come back to that a little bit more. So I did a bit of looking for you about Canada. I found a bit here from 2018. Said it's on the Government of Canada website, and there was a study into the prevalence of looking at asthma and COPD. So at this time, 3.8 million people over the age of 1 are living with asthma, and 2 million people living with COPD, both of which can impact a person's ability to breathe. Individuals living with asthma or COPD may experience impaired participation in daily life, school, work, and social activities. Collectively, there is also an impact in terms of lost productivity and healthcare costs, especially considering the increasing prevalence of both asthma and COPD. So if you want to have a look through all their charts and the detail, you'll find that on the website. Oh, now this is a bit that I found in my new book that I just finished reading. So Carl, and I'd never heard of him. I can't believe I'd not heard of him, but Carl, I don't know if it's Stoff or Stow, but he was an American singer and choral director who lived from 1926 to the year 2000. And he started to realize through his training of singers that they were not very good at breathing. They were not very good at breathing. And so he started this journey of really wanting to understand what optimal breathing for singing looked like, and this concept of breath support that we hear so much about as singers. You know, it's such a term, isn't it, in voice pedagogy. So he went on this journey, and his work led him to develop methods for working with respiratory patients, mostly for people with emphysema. And I'll throw a picture video in there to remind myself to show you the video. So he really did discover that it was that respiratory healthcare professionals were not focusing on this importance of the exhalation. So his methods included sort of hands-on. He would sort of massage and really be very hands-on with the patients he was working with, in order to really get them working the right muscles to be able to strengthen the diaphragm and support them to be able to exhale longer. And one of the exercises he did is actually something that we do a lot within our Singing for Lung Health work anyway, which was really great to see. I'm just going to stop sharing and then find the, oh, and it's nice just to see you all for a moment there as well. Is everybody okay? Are we all okay? Great. Just bear with me while I swap screens. This is just a short clip of his work, and you'll get a glimpse of the book as well, which is called Breath. The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. Absolutely fascinating, essential reading for everybody, I think. Here's just a short snippet of this practitioner and his work with the patient.
This is Mr. Cannon when I first got him. He was an advanced emphysema patient. In fact, he was a bed patient. You can see that his breathing is what we call accessory breathing. That is, that on every inhale, he is lifting the chest, the shoulders sit high, and when that happens, here we are seeing the neck. The neck tenses on every inhale as he grabs for breath. All of these pictures were taken to show the abnormalities of how the breathing process goes when it is reversed. Now we have Mr. Cannon way past 6 months. He was able to go out of the hospital on weekends. In fact, he's gotten, as you can see, he will smile a little bit, and he is walking with quite a jaunty walk.
So there we go. And that's what we see a lot of presenting in our work with respiratory patients. We see a lot of this, the shoulders, the neck getting involved, this kind of grabbing for air, really kind of feeling that they just can't get enough air in. And actually, if we can encourage that to drop, and if we can encourage the diaphragmatic breathing and the lengthening of the exhale, it just encourages the diaphragm to move a little more. So the diaphragm, as we probably all know, is the dome-shaped muscle that sits underneath our ribs, and as it draws down, air gets pulled, sucked into the lungs. It's like bellows. It's a bellows action. So the diaphragm comes down and creates space for the air to suck in, and then as the air goes out, the diaphragm comes back up again into its dome position there. So it's sort of down and up. And what happens is that if we're not using the full capacity of our lungs and we're just breathing into the top of our lungs, up here, this top bit up here, then the diaphragm is not actually moving very much. It's still moving because it does. It's an involuntary muscle, and it's what kickstarts the breath pattern. So it can't not move. But what happens is that if we don't fully exhale and then fully inhale, is that the diaphragm it's not moving very much, and it becomes very stiff and stuck. And what runs through the diaphragm is not only the windpipe, but also our major vein and our major artery. So if it's all a bit stuck and clunky, then it's not only affecting the breath, it's affecting our whole circulatory system, because it's just, everything's a bit stuck and stiff. So by first focusing on the exhalation, we can encourage a natural, deeper breath in. Is that all making sense? I'm sorry if I'm telling you what you already know. Marvelous. So let's come back to the slides. It was just wonderful to find his work written about in this book, because although he was allowed to work with these patients, it did kind of put the backs up of healthcare professionals, because he wasn't a healthcare professional. He was he was a choral director. And he did set up the Institute for Breathing Coordination, but it ended when he died. So all that work kind of went, and there wasn't really a great deal written about it. He didn't really do any research, which is why I think it sort of got lost, really. But obviously this was a long time before the last couple of decades of research that's happened, since on Singing for Lung Health. Anyway, interesting stuff. So being breathless is actually very normal. So it's not a bad thing. It's not a dangerous thing to be breathless. It's usually as a result of physical exertion, and it's not usually dangerous. We usually recover from that. But chronic breathlessness is defined as severe breathlessness that persists for more than 3 months, and despite optimal medical treatment for an underlying disease, which results in disability. And so there can be both physical and psychological impacts to being breathless, feeling breathless. And dysfunctional breathing is something that, well, if you read this book, you'll think we've all got dysfunctional breathing. We've basically all learned how to breathe wrong in the last 300 years. largely due to not chewing our food as much, because we have processed food and a lot of soft processed food. We don't chew as much, so everything's got smaller. So, but dysfunctional breathing is an umbrella that describes an alteration in the normal biomechanical patterns of breathing that result in intermittent or chronic symptoms, which may be respiratory and or non-respiratory. So one person who is breathless and has dysfunctional breathing may not actually have COPD or asthma, and somebody else with COPD can actually be managing quite well and not really experiencing breathlessness. So this is the kind of the anomaly with it, really, because you can have a respiratory condition but not really experience too much breathlessness, be able to manage it. Patients with dysfunctional breathing present with a variety of respiratory and non-respiratory symptoms: wheezing, throat tightness, chest pain, throat clearing, air hunger, a sense of being unable to get a complete breath in. So those are kind of things associated with dysfunctional breathing. Breathing up here, seeing the shoulders coming up, breathing into the top past the lungs, which is actually known as hyperventilation syndrome. So this is over-breathing, which again, if you read this book, it's believed that many of us are over-breathing. We're doing what's called top-up breathing, and we see this a lot with patients that we work with in Singing for Lung Health. It's usually something that we do in response to fear or anxiety or anger, stemming from our evolutionary fight or flight response, preparing the body for action. So the top of the lungs is more associated with the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight and flight system. So we get this kind of, if we're nervous or anxious, we get this sort of light breathing, and obviously if we're not breathing out fully, doing that lovely long exhalation, we're just going to keep going up and up and up and up. And this type of dysfunctional breathing is more frequent in COPD than in asthma. We also have to think about the effects of trauma and stress on the breath. So just to touch on this, a person who's had more adverse childhood experiences, maybe say 5 on the ACE scores, they're 2.6 times more likely to develop COPD, with little effect made by whether they smoke or not. And states of stress activate the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, which is about preparing the body for action and therefore increasing that breath rate. And then obviously breath is the power source for our voice. So if we've got issues with our breathing, as Carl Stoff was finding, or Stow was finding, that his singers were struggling with breath to be able to get to the ends of phrases. So efficient use of breath is central to healthy phonation. So voice changes are not a direct symptom of COPD, but many COPD patients do experience voice changes. So a study found that 50% of participants experience dysphonia, so hoarseness of the voice. If we're thinking about the breath powering the vocal folds to vibrate together, that actually if there's not very much power, there's not very much happening with the breath, that the vocal folds are not going to be fully meeting. They're not going to be strongly vibrating as much as they would with a better breath, with a better exhalation, because we make sound on the exhalation. Respiratory conditions can cause adverse effects on the voice, and this has a knock-on effect with quality of life. COPD can affect vocal quality production as a result of respiratory decline and as a side effect of medication. So the inhalers can be very bad for the voice. So the inhaled steroids cause formation of deposits, and they can irritate the laryngeal mucosa. So it's recommended that when people use an inhaler, that they swish around their mouths with water afterwards, so that they get rid of any excess medication that's lurking in their mouths. And smoking can cause swelling. So singing for lung health then. So in terms of the physical benefits, we're encouraging optimal use of the respiratory muscles, so we're supporting the breath out. So we're really working not so much about the breath in, but focusing on the breath out and focusing on exercises which proactively support the muscles, the giggle muscles we call them. We find them underneath our ribs, the abdominal muscles, which can really help us to sustain and lengthen and support that exhalation. So you might want to just have a little play around with them now. If you can just sort of tuck your fingers underneath your ribs and just maybe do a laugh. You'll feel the muscles just pulling in. So that's what we're encouraging, the building of those muscles. If you're familiar with SOVT exercises, semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, which not only improve dysphonia, but also can really help to build these muscles, the abdominal muscles. You can do some in a bit. And so it encourages this learning of breath control and management. So in terms of moving towards a more informed practice, so the accent method, which is also linked to SOVTs, but it's a breathing method that's about, again, a diaphragmatic breathing, the tummy coming out as we breathe in, and then the tummy moving back towards the spine as we breathe out. Some other breathing methodologies within singing support the kind of standing upright and keeping it up here and holding it there. But the accent method really is about sort of letting the tummy relax and breathing out, allowing the tummy to come out. Singing leaders need some training in respiratory anatomy physiology for best practice in singing for lung health. In 2016, there was the first systematic review of looking at all the research so far, and these studies were included, including one in Canada. So you've got a fantastic practitioner and researcher based in Canada, Rachel Goldenberg. And it found positive findings to suggest that singing has the potential to improve the management of breathlessness and increase social participation, improved health status in those with COPD. I can't remember if I said chronic obstructive pulmonary disease is COPD, if you didn't know. No adverse effects were reported. So what came out of that was that it was defining singing for lung health as being much more focused on breath and posture and supporting phonation at vocal fold level, with a focus on choice of appropriate repertoire and exercises. Less emphasis on the quality of singing or performing. Coughing is more likely to be tolerated than in a traditional choir setting. Certainly, once you start really getting people to the ends of their exhalation, we do get lots of coughing, because it's shifting all the technical term gunk, the gunk that's lying in the bottom of the lungs that's just been sitting there dormant. So we do get a lot of coughing. Singing for Lung Health provides physical, psychological and social benefits and presents an opportunity for breathing patterns to be consciously modified. They found that there were similarities between statutory pulmonary rehabilitation. So this is typically a 10-week programme offered by the NHS, which is a group-based programme which looks at lifestyle management, physical exercise, some breathing exercises. So it was found to be very similar results, and that singing for lung health should not replace, but could be an effective gateway to or a signpost from pulmonary rehab. But certainly in the UK, provision is very patchy, and it's largely due to funding and availability of suitably trained singing leaders. So I trained with Phoene Cave when it was run by the British Lung Foundation, and she's trained more than 200 practitioners in the UK and beyond in this particular approach. And a shared language is needed with healthcare professionals. So diaphragmatic breathing is a term that we use in singing, but it's not used in a clinical context. There's just some of the limitations there from that study. All these studies basically say more research is needed. That's always the recommendation. But it was suggested that controlling exploration through singing techniques may have analogous comparable effects being useful when managing and recovering from episodes of extreme breathlessness. Singing may also enhance sputum. There we go. Gunk is sputum clearance, as both dynamic lung volume and airflow are increased. I'm just realizing the time, so that's why I've sped up a little bit, because I do want to make sure we've got some time. So in the 2020 publication of the Routledge Companion to Interdisciplinary Studies in Singing, Volume 3, this was a focus on well-being. So there was a section in there about singing for lung health, suggesting that training is required, that singing has the potential to improve breathlessness, as we've said, social and psychological benefits are well documented. More research, looking at particular demographics or perhaps other lung conditions, because most of the research is on COPD, and more research on the cost-saving implications and the reduction in healthcare utilisation. And so this is really quite hot off the press. So Mette Cascard, who Phoene trained a little while ago, is based in Denmark, and she's just completed her PhD study in which she did a randomized control trial, so a big study comparing singing for lung health with pulmonary rehabilitation. And so these were some of the measures that we used: the 6-minute walking test and quality of life questionnaires. Really, because we need more evidence. We need more evidence. But essentially, this is quite a landmark study because she defined from quite a large. She had over 200 participants, randomized control trial, and it showed that singing for lung health does seem to provide relevant physiological changes in COPD, and that it is just as effective as pulmonary rehabilitation. Hooray! Oh, good. We are great, lovely. I'm sorry for whipping through that, but I did want to just leave some time at the end. So that's my email address there, and the websites of the various bodies that I'm involved with. So there we go. And that's where I am right now. Sorry, I've just got to say that's where I am right now, that photograph. Beautiful island. So there we go.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Emily. Just a reminder, if anybody has a question, you can drop it in the chat. Or Emily, do you want them to wave since we have our cameras on? Would that be appropriate as well?
Whichever, yes. But I'd love to also just give you some practical exercises as well. But let's just see if there's any questions immediately, or if I can see a couple of nods going on about some exercises. Or does anybody want to jump straight in?
I think we'd love to get some practical tips and tricks from you before questions would be great.
Okay, great. So I work with my partner, and she's a sound therapist, and so we run the sessions together. So we start the sessions with some mindfulness meditation, and Jane plays her beautiful instruments, Tibetan singing bowls and chimes, and it just really adds to that environment of just relaxation. Because we've been online, we've been online for the last 2 years and some, which has obviously been very different. But before that, when we were in person, people were coming and they would, they'd driven, they'd walked, and they come into the room and you can see this going on, so it was really important as part of the preparation to get the body into a state of grounding, relaxation, openness, awareness, because so much of this work within Singing for Health is about encouraging a sense of awareness, self-awareness. Yes, harmonica studies. Yeah, so we don't use harmonicas, but we use kazoos, which are fantastic, and that is it's essentially doing an SOVT exercise, because you're partially restricting. We do it with straws or with kazoos, but kazoos are great because they're good fun, and we all love those. So I always start the sessions just with a check-in first and foremost, because it's a social group. They, you know, they feel they love it, you know, they get so much from each other, and knowing that they're all kind of in the same boat, you know, that's sort of that connection. So we always start with a check-in, and then we'll kind of move into just a bit of mindfulness meditation. And I've got most of my group are men, actually, sort of older. A couple of them are over 80. And, you know, when they first come in and see the sound healing instruments, they sort of go, oh, is Jane going to be is she doing the washing up? You know, and they're sitting there with one eye open, kind of looking at these instruments, thinking, what's all this? What's all this? But then we kind of get into it, and before we know it, their eyes are closed and they're almost nodding off, because it's the combination of that and the kind of the focusing on the breath. So yeah, I would encourage them to sit with their lower back supported, feet flat on the floor, making sure that the knees are not sort of uncomfortable. So you might need to scoot your feet further out, just so that your knees are not taking any pressure. Sometimes we sit in a Qigong pose, if you've come across Qigong. So that's a kind of energy movement, it's a bit like Tai Chi. But we just kind of settle into that. And then Jane plays the lovely instruments, and I speak a little bit about bringing awareness into relaxing certain parts of the body. So feeling your feet on the floor, let your legs hang, let your buttocks really sink into the chair. Notice how it feels. You've probably all done very similar exercises. Closing the eyes, eventually kind of working through the body, physically noticing if there's any tension being held that we can just really just encourage to let go. And then I will bring attention to the breath. And firstly, just being aware of your natural breath pattern without trying to change, without trying to alter it. You might want to put a hand on your tummy, just to be aware of whether you can feel any movement in your tummy as you're breathing in and out. My screen is frozen.
I can still hear you, Emily. I think we're still good. We can hear your voice.
Okay, good, because everything froze there for a moment. So I thought you're either really relaxed or
we were relaxed, and we can hear you, so we're good to continue, I think.
Okay, wonderful. So yes, just really checking in with how your breath is feeling without trying to do anything different. Noticing the pattern of your breath, noticing if there are any pauses either at the top or the bottom of your breath. Are you breathing in for longer than you're breathing out? Are you breathing in and out through your nose? How it feels to breathe, where you can feel it in your body. The temperature of the breath. And then I would invite participants to then start to gradually lengthen and deepen the breath. And so we'll have gone through and we'll have dropped, we'll have imagined our ribs softening and widening and opening, and the top of the chest opening. So we'll have done all this lovely visualization about opening, expanding, softening. And then we start to think about breathing more deeply. So here I would encourage a breath in through the nose, as if you're smelling something absolutely beautiful. A flower in the garden or a freshly baked cake, and you're just you want to inhale the smell as deeply as you can through your nose, and then go, ah, like that is just divine. Ah, so releasing out through the mouth. And again, smelling something really, really beautiful. Keeping your hand on your tummy, can you feel your tummy now starting to engage and really coming out and go, ah. And then we'll move to breathing out, so on a shush or a hiss. So again, taking that breath in through the nose as if we're smelling something delicious, and then breathing out on as long as you can on a shush. And the more that we do this, the more we practice this, the more consistent we can make that breath. What we find initially is that there's a great big gush at the beginning because the muscles are not strengthened. So we get shh. But what we want to do is keep it very smooth and consistent from the very beginning of the sound to the end. Shh. And so we might do that on a hiss or a shush. And then we will start to play around with making a wave sound. So we'll follow it with our hand as well. It's always good to bring it into the body. So we're really embodying the whole experience. We're working with the body and the breath. I might encourage them to breathe in and draw the shoulders up. And then drop them down on a sigh. And then we might do let's do it on a hiss. So and we'll start with it quiet, and then it will get louder, and then it will get quieter again on a hiss. And again, the trick there is that we're trying to manage our breath flow. We're trying to recognize when we need to come down so that we've got a bit of quiet at the end, that we don't gush it all out in the middle, that we're really controlling that flow of air so that we can make the whole wave sound from quiet to loud to quiet, noticing what's happening when we do go louder with the breath, noticing what's happening within the muscles, noticing that the muscles might be engaging a bit more to get a bit louder, to push the air out a bit. Obviously it's better to breathe in through the nose, but we do, because when we're singing, we don't necessarily breathe in through the nose. We will take a mouth practice, what I call the thank you breath, as if somebody's presented you with the most amazing gift that is just what you've always wanted, and they go, here you go, and you open your eyes and you go, oh, thank you. So you drop the tongue down, you drop the jaw. Oh, thank you. And we keep the shoulders down and it's into the tummy. So it's also the breath that we do before we're about to yawn. So bring on a yawn. So yawning is great for opening the larynx and the voice as well, but it's practicing that open breath in. So thank you, I'm so overjoyed, or I'm really tired. But either way, you can feel how open that is. So that's the kind of breath that we want to be encouraging, not the breath in between phrases. So we're really bringing that awareness. And then we might do exercises that are then about really trying to get the last dregs of air out from the bottoms of the lungs. Either, sucking in through a straw is a good one as well. So imagine that you're sucking a long piece of spaghetti and put your hand on your tummy as you do that. And you should feel that breathing in through pursed lips really does get the tummy working. It really does get right there. So if they're struggling to feel it with the breathing in through the nose, the pursed lips, can you feel that? Can you feel how it's immediately engaging with your tummy? So breathing in either of those three ways, either smelling something delicious, sucking in through a straw, or thank you. And then we might do a long shush or a hiss again. And then when you feel that these muscles, these giggle muscles, when you feel them slightly engaging, start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, just very, very gently for as long as you can, all the way to the end, all the way to the end. So you're shushing or hissing until you feel, it's like your petrol tank has just, the petrol light's just come on. You know, you've got that last bit in the tank, you feel the muscles engaging. So shh, for as long as you can, nice and consistent. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And then you get this lovely springy, the breath just drops back in, and it's a lovely open breath that drops straight back into the tummy without you even having to think about it. So those are some of the exercises that we'll do kind of just to engage with the breath. And then we'll bring in the voice exercises. So the SOVTs, either using a straw or, but I wouldn't do that with beginners. with respiratory conditions, doing straw work, you have to be very, very cautious, because they'll probably need a wider straw and maybe a shorter straw. So I can do this confidently now with my group, because we've been together, 4 years. So they know the ropes and they know what to do. But that's great. Or kazoo is good because it's wider as well. But sliding up and down, but the do we know that one? The sound. So if you find your giggle muscles again, sort of underneath your ribs there, and we want to keep the throat nice and soft and relaxed, and we're just going to go, and you should feel your muscles going like that. So this is a great exercise because it's brilliant for the voice, but it's also we're building these muscles. We do as many as we can do on one breath, and then what I might do is integrate some movement as well. So we might do pat the head and rub the tummy. Pat the head, and we might do so. We'll do 4 and then swap. So we do. And so on. So there I'm integrating gentle movement because, as I said earlier, being breathless is not dangerous. And actually for people with a chronic respiratory condition, they will have such a fear of being breathless that they don't allow themselves to just push themselves a little bit. So this is a little bit like exercise by stealth. So we're kind of getting moving. So I'll do, if we're sitting down, I'll do things like reaching across the body and lifting up the butt cheek, lifting up and moving across, and anything that crosses the midline. So anything that does, we do a lot of this one as well. Anything that crosses the midline is really also building the corpus callosum, which is the bridge between the 2 hemispheres of the brain. So we're doing lots of things. We're kind of building up the muscles, we're building up the resilience to exercise, as well as warming up the voice, doing some great stuff for the voice, and managing the breath. So that's just some ideas about exercises. I just go very gentle, great. Oh yeah, as a flautist, yeah, wonderful. And then we do a lot more as well, things standing up, sort of swinging the top part of the body is also a really good way to kind of get these muscles working as well, and singing something while you do that. Again, people are going to have different abilities, so for people that are beginners, you're going to have to differentiate. Repertoire choice is also very, very important. So for example, to give you 2 contrasting songs, I would not do "What should we do with a drunken sailor? What should we do with a drunken sailor? What should we do with a drunken sailor? I lie in the morning." It's not very conducive to supporting the breath. So we pick songs that have got nice longer phrases, but space to breathe as well. I have to stop there.
Thank you, Emily. It's okay. At least I could hear everything you were saying, even though your screen was frozen. So great. We got every bit of what you just did. And can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Yes, we got everything you did. Thank you so much. I have to say that we really are thankful. I'm thankful for the practical part at the end as well. There's lots of tips and tricks, and it's great to have that reminder. We are out of time at 4:30, and to get the contact info that was on the last slide, I think we have a question from Heather. So we are going to be posting the webinar online. They're recorded and they're put online as well with the slides. So that's, if that's great for everyone, you can find us online. It'll be about 4 days. And I just want to throw our email for those of you that need the certificate for your professional hour, your hour of completion for attending the webinar. Just throw an email out to info@room217.ca. But I think we could have you come back, Emily, and just do an hour workshop on just practical exercises. That was really amazing. So thank you so much on behalf of Room 217. I'd love to applaud the webinar today. Thank you so much. And again, this will be online in about 4 or 5 days. And on that, I want to thank everybody, and thank you, Emily. It was a wonderful webinar.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Lovely to see you all. Have a good rest of your day.